Good morning. Welcome to RBC Disruptors. I'm John Stackhouse, host of our ongoing conversation about disruption, innovation, and how technology is changing everything around us. This is our annual Summer Disruptors, where we get to focus on youth entrepreneurship. It's a topic we're passionate about. We're joined in the audience today. It's a terrific audience of more than 500 summer students at RBC. We're also joined live across the country with a lot more of our summer interns, including a viewing party in Montreal. The reason we staged this conversation is because we are passionate about the next generation of Canadians and where they're going to take this country in the 2020s and 2030s. And we think entrepreneurship is going to be critical to that. It's one of the reasons we partner with a terrific organization called Next Canada, which helps pull together, inspire, coach, and mentor some of the aspiring entrepreneurs in this country. We're going to hear from Next CEO Joe Canavan later in the conversation, but as part of this co-production, we've got two Next alumni here to share their stories and talk about their journey as entrepreneurs. We want you to be part of the conversation. Join us on social, share your questions. We'll get them on a screen here and make sure we get them into the conversation. You're also going to want to listen carefully to the answers, because at the end of today's Disruptors, we've got a special contest through Kahoot with some prizes, including tickets to the Jonas Brothers concert next week. So listen to the answers is all I can say. So into the conversation, we're joined by Braden Ream and Julia Kerouac, who've got terrific businesses. I'll get them to tell us both about their journeys. But Braden and Julia, thank you for joining RBC Disruptors.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We were talking about anchormen while the video was showing, so we'll get to that question. Julia wanted to know if I had seen Anchorman, so we'll get to that. But first question, since we're talking about entrepreneurship, which entrepreneur inspires you most, Julia?
Oh man, I was gonna steal yours.
Yeah.
Should I?
Prearrange this.
Okay, so we're not ganging up on you, I promise. Definitely in the food space, just because, spoiler alert, that's what I'm in. I really respect a lot of the people who have been in it, like the OGs, who have been in it for a really long time and have really forged the path of organics. So there's definitely a lot that come to mind. The founder of Stony Field Organics is incredible. Yeah, I'll go with him.
Okay.
He's incredible.
Braden.
Yeah.
I'm going with the classic Elon Musk. It's incredible to do $1 billion company in your lifetime, let alone 4 or 5. His side projects have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, so he's pretty incredible.
Okay, so tell us about your billion-dollar dreams. Julia, we'll start with you. And first of all, describe your company.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm a food manufacturer. So my brand is called Nudfud, and we produce some of the highest quality nutrient-dense snacks on the market. Obviously, I'm biased, but I'm a nutritionist too, so I can back that up. And we make just healthy snacks for convenience, and they're sold nationally. We have sweet ones and savory. And you want me to say my billion-dollar dream, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously just to sell as many products as possible. Woo, spoiler. But yeah, just because my sole mission as a nutritionist is to improve the way people eat. So part of that is obviously getting more functional nutrition incorporated into everyone's daily diets. So if we're selling more, that means we're impacting more lives and having people eat more nutrient-dense foods. So that's my ultimate goal. Yeah.
I love that answer, because something I've learned from entrepreneurs is, of course, they want to grow their business, but their real passion is changing the world, which they're going to do through their business. Yeah. Braden, tell us what you're up to.
Sure.
Braden, by the way, was a summer student at RBC last summer, so we'll get into some of his learnings.
It's been a crazy year. Who here has an Alexa or Google Assistant device? Hands up. Yeah. So if you're using an Alexa or Google Assistant on the front end, so if you're a little techie, that's actually a voice user interface when you're having a conversation back and forth. And so when people are actually building voice apps for these devices, even the phone lines that you call into the big banks, those are all voice user interfaces. There's actually no good conversational design software, and that's where we come in. So we're almost like an Adobe for voice user interfaces. And I think today we power over 8 to 12 million conversations a month, depending on how busy the traffic is that month. So that's what we do. We're like Adobe for voice interfaces.
So let's talk about what inspired you, what sparked you to be an entrepreneur versus doing any number of other things that you probably could have done. There's something like 1.17 million small businesses in the country, 1.17 million small businesses in the country. So lots of entrepreneurs out there. What made you, Braden, I'm going to start with you, want to take that path?
In I think high school, I had a media project where they said, come up with an idea for an app. And I have a super obsessive personality, and so I came up with this app idea, and after the project was done, I didn't really want to let it go. And so over that summer, I remember I went off with my family, and I downloaded a PDF on how to learn C++, because that was like the first thing I learned when I was like, how to code an app, and it was like C++. If any of you are techie, you know that's a horrible first language to learn, but that's what I did that summer is I learned C++, and I just started to build apps and side projects, and I had a blast doing it. I just love to build things, and when you think about the coolest thing in life to build is a company which builds other things, right? So building sort of the factory that also builds the products, and so to me that I just got hooked, and I've been doing it ever since.
And Julia, what sparked you?
Yeah,
you used to be in ballet, right? So that's a real pivot.
Yeah, so I used to be a ballet
Pardon
dancer.
the expression, it was a pivot.
It's okay. So I used to be a ballet dancer. I was living abroad in San Francisco and New York. I had some really terrible injuries that ended my career. And when I came back, that had already been an alternate route for me to take. I chose to do ballet instead of go off to university, as I saw all my peers do. So I was kind of already okay with taking an alternate route and sticking my neck out. And when I came back, I'm a holistic nutritionist too, as I said, so I'm really passionate about feeding people good quality food. And what I saw in the marketplace was just deplorable. There's more options now, but it was garbage. Too much sugar and highly processed. And making people sick, which is unacceptable, especially in a country where we have healthcare that is available to all Canadians. I just knew I could do better, and just tried it. I'm really just unemployable, and I'm trying to say it in a nice way.
That's true of a lot of entrepreneurs.
That's
the only boss that will accept them is themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That's always the real, more candid answer. Yeah.
So talk a bit about the entrepreneurial spirit, because probably a lot of people in the audience today are thinking, could I, when I'm out of school, start my own business? And it takes a certain spirit. Julia, you could have gone and worked for a food company or one of those great organic companies and probably done similar stuff, but you had to do it on your own. What's the spirit that drives that?
Yeah, I wish there was a better answer, so maybe you'll be sad to pick on me, but I would say in general, I don't know if I can speak for you, but I didn't really think a lot about it. I just saw a need in the marketplace and just did it. I didn't think I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. I honestly didn't even think that much. I was just I need to do this for humanity, and let's just give it a go and figure it out. And that was literally it. It's not as cool of an answer.
No, I think that's pretty common. No one says, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, where do I apply?
Right.
Yeah.
There's no application to be an entrepreneur. Right. You just find you're doing it one day. Braden, what?
It's funny. I often get asked, how do I get into the startup industry? I'm like, it is the easiest industry to break into. You can just decide at any moment that you're in the startup industry.
The key word though is start. What was your start?
I think it's very similar to Julia. I never coined myself as an entrepreneur until people are like, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur." I guess I've just been building these side projects for a while now, and you just get really obsessive over it, and you continue to do it for a long period of time. One of the tough things you're going to find when you're first starting out is people won't take you seriously, and so it's actually a really big hurdle, and that's where programs that sort of support you as an early stage venture help you feel legitimate. Often it's it's not about the capital, it's just getting home from work and feeling like I'm an actual entrepreneur, I'm gonna, I did my 9 to 5, now I'm gonna do the 5 to 9. And that's where, a lot of the really hard work comes, and you just have to sort of power through that.
And you were, as I mentioned, at RBC last summer, part of the Amplify program. What did you learn through that's stuck with you in your business today?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about what cross-functional teams look like. So I typically, if I don't know if Oren's in my room, who's my manager at Amplify. Is Oren here? Oren?
Yeah.
Hey. So I was doing a little bit of coding, a little bit of designing, probably a little bit of what I should have been doing for most of my time. And I think what Amplify taught me was, there are designated roles for a reason. There are specialists, there are designers. You cannot do everything. And now that we're growing to a bigger and bigger team, that's really important for me as a manager to realize that I can't do everything and I have to delegate to people who are more specialized than me. And I think Amplify did a really good job sort of forcing you into these cross-functional teams.
We've talked about that before, and it's one of the powers of being young is that you're probably more open to saying, look, I don't know how to do that. I got to go find someone who can do that, and you kind of delegate to people who are a lot more experienced than you. How did you, when you started Voiceflow, actually tell us a bit about day one, how you got it going. But what were the challenges? What did you learn about building that team and attracting that talent?
Yeah. I'll tell the story in a second then. One of the biggest challenges that I face is that because I'm a young entrepreneur is I don't know what I don't know. So for example, I always know that we need more engineers because that's what I've been doing for 3 or 4 years, but I don't know if I added a UX researcher, would that be valuable? Because I've never worked with a UX researcher before, I guess besides Amplify. I don't know if I need a salesperson because I've never worked with a salesperson before. And so that's actually where reaching out to people who have done this before, who have built these teams is really, really important because you do not know what you do not know. And it can be a big challenge. In terms of how we got started, so I did my first sort of long-term venture throughout college. I was building a social network because that was totally a good idea in 2015. And I did that for about 3 years, and that's where I got into tech. That's where I learned how to actually build teams, how to build product. And after that sort of wound down, I met my co-founders through Next Canada, and we just started to toy around with different ideas. The first couple ones failed, and at some point, my co-founder Mike had one of the early Echo Dots, like the hockey puck looking ones, in his room, and he thought, oh, these Alexa things are really interesting. We should try to play around with it. Had a couple ideas in voice commerce and eventually landed on, it sounds funny now, but interactive children's stories. It's a really good use case. There's no blue light. Parents are really worried about blue light when they're going to bed. They don't want their kids on screens. It's a great bedtime activity for you to be in bed and be able to do an interactive like children's story with your kid. You get choose your own adventure. And so we did this for 5 or 6 months, and as we were building this business, we actually raised $500,000 for it. We realized it was really, really hard to build these interactive children's stories on Alexa. And so we were like, well, that's ridiculous. There should be more tooling, more modern ways to build these things, and that's where the idea for Voiceflow came is, let's put the children's stories on hold for a second, and maybe one day we'll get back to it. But for now, let's build the tools to empower millions of other creatives to build these voice interfaces more easily, and that's how our idea came about.
So I think as a country, we're not doing as well as we could in terms of convincing younger people to start their own businesses. The number we've got is 1.7% of entrepreneurs in the country are under the age of 30. It's kind of embarrassing that less than 2% of the entrepreneurs out there are under 30. What did you both find were the biggest challenges of getting going in your 20s, Julia?
Yeah, well, I mean, to echo what you said as well, I think you really are naive, but I think that naivete kind of works in your favor in the sense that you really don't know what you're getting into, for better or worse, and how hard it's going to be. And you have obviously more energy, typically, when you're a bit younger, and don't have the same responsibilities with family or a partner. So it's definitely, or mortgages, presumably, so it's a little bit easier to kind of dive in and put yourself in head first. But definitely challenges were hiring, my business specifically manufacturing and in food. So it's a very much of a sausage club, like old boys club. So going as like a young female, tall blonde, they would not take me very seriously.
How do you overcome that?
I mean, just storm in and do your job. I don't know. It's definitely, it's obviously not only to my industry, it's tech, there's everywhere. Females have challenges. But yeah, I just kind of had to, remove the noise and, if there was any harassment or, whatever it is, just go above it and just do my job and get in and be like, I'm gonna make this work, whether you wanna support me or not. Just watch me and prove them wrong. So yeah, that was just kind of the approach I did. And yeah, with hiring, it was definitely a challenge when you're hiring people who are older. And
how so? Walk us through that experience.
Yeah, it was just awkward for me because I'd only grown up in my family and obviously with my parents and my parental units. It was like the older people are smarter and it's just you give respect, right? So you can still give respect obviously to an elder person who's an employee, but it just was a little bit different when it's like I'm supposed to have the answers and have everything all figured out, and I'm paying you. Like, it was just a little bit awkward at first, but you get over it. It's like you learn on the fly, you figure out how to manage. Like, that's one thing about entrepreneurship, is you just figure it out as you go, for sure. And you constantly try and get better. That's in product. I'm sure, again, you could say the same. You constantly try and just improve and learn from your failures and your mistakes, and just implement all the changes required to really just get to that expert level. So, yeah.
And we were talking before we came on stage about how
all sorts of things.
How powerful it is to be a young entrepreneur, because you can take chances that you may not be able to take later in life.
Totally. Yeah. Like, I know I won't be destitute. Like, if I fail miserably, I'll be at least able to have that safety net and be looked after. And obviously, being in Canada is incredible too. Like, you have healthcare, you know that there's at least a social security net to support you if you were to fail super miserably. So, yeah.
And Braden, as an entrepreneur in your 20s, what have been you've talked a bit about the challenges, but what have been some of the strengths that you found as a young entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is you don't have to live off much, because you're not at a point in life where you have a mortgage. And so when we were starting Storyflow after the summer, I was in my last year of Ivy, and I actually dropped out of Ivy to do this interactive children's story company. And the story I tell is my parents cried when I got into Ivy, and they certainly cried when I dropped out.
So those were tears of sadness or happiness?
Tears of sadness. Yeah. No, even when we'd raise $500,000, I remember my parents coming and be like, yeah, this is cool, but when are you going to go back to school? And it's certainly changed as numbers have gotten bigger, but that was the initial reaction. Yeah, but my point there was, like, you can live at home, you can live, like, we were paying ourselves, our official salaries, even after raising $500,000, was $12,000 a year. So $1,000 a month is pretty much a stipend to pay for food and like lunches and like a couple, Ubers and things like that. That's not something you can do later in life. The other thing is people won't judge you at 22, 23, 24 if you have a little bit of an employment gap on your resume, because you went off and tried a thing. And so the risk definitely does get larger as you get later in life. So I think if you have an idea that you want to pursue, don't necessarily drop out of school, but just go for it, because this is certainly the best time to do it.
And how do you overcome the challenge of being the 21-year-old or 22-year-old going into a business meeting or trying to make a sale or do a hire?
When I'm advising younger entrepreneurs, I always try to say, do not bring up your age, because at the end of the day, it's not about being the best 22-year-old CEO, it's about being the best CEO. It's a big mistake a lot of people make, because they think that because they're doing this at a younger age, it makes them impressive. It is impressive, but it's much better that's a very low bar, right? To be the best 22-year-old CEO in Canada versus the best CEO, period, right? It's a much higher bar to strive for. And I think people actually will respect you a lot more, and you'll get a lot more done. You'll actually become more impressive just through your successes by aiming for a much higher target. So definitely, I wouldn't factor in your age. Like this is just me, but like I stripped all the age stuff from my LinkedIn. So I'm 22, but like you cannot find that out, right? You can't find graduation dates or anything like that, because when I go into a meeting, I just want you to be meeting with Braden, not some 22-year-old dropout.
Yeah, although I think if Elon Musk were here, he'd probably say that many, if not most, of the great things accomplished in history have been by people in their 20s.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the perfect age to do remarkable things, because you can take chances, but you've got the creative spark, the energy, and you can see more into the future, because you've got more of the future ahead of you.
I think the previous point about being naive actually helping you is totally true. If we were sort of business savvy, we would not have started an interactive children's story company, right? But just putting one foot in front of the other and actually just being naive allowed us to get to the point where we are today. If we'd known, like, I'll tell you the economics of our business right now. It costs $2,000 to create a story, and we had $10,000. Right? So we had 5 stories left before we completely went out of business. To us, that made sense, because $10,000 was a lot of money at the time, right? That was, it felt like a very large number, and so that was okay. In hindsight, if we were actually more savvy, we may not be doing this today, and I might be on a very different career trajectory. So yeah, being naive when you're young can actually be a benefit for you as well.
So something that's essential to entrepreneurship is an ability to roll with failure. think it's 7,000 businesses a year in Canada go bankrupt. That's kind of natural. People try things, they don't work out. Maybe you can share a couple of stories about your own failures and how you adjusted with that. Julia, let's start with you.
Yeah, I've had a lot. There's definitely different challenges in every industry. In food, there's a lot of challenges in regards that we have the responsibility of feeding people safe food. Every time a product goes out, it has to be the same, it has to be consistent, and it has to be safe. So it's a lot of responsibility and reliability, and our margins are much less and much tighter in food. So it doesn't give you a lot of play to really make a lot of mistakes. You could be out of business, and food specifically has a really high fail rate. It's really capital intensive. So in regards to biggest failures, I've had a ton. I'll pinpoint maybe a couple. Was that I did a UPC change, which if everyone's familiar with packaged goods, you've got the SKU on the back, the UPC. That was terrible. If any of you ever have friends with anything that is a consumer good, don't ever do it. I almost lost my whole business. And then also, depending on suppliers, to put out the same standard of goods that I put out or I expect is also a big mistake. Again, being naive, I expected everyone had the same standards in general in business, and they don't, and you learn the hard way. So we had a packaging supplier that was actually selling us packaging that had holes in it, and we sent out a whole shipment in our launch in Loblaws, and all of them had holes. So we had to deal with that. Like, there's been so many. I could talk for hours.
What did you learn from that experience?
Don't trust people.
Or at least double check the packaging.
Yeah, yes, no, and we did. But when you're ordering like 100,000, there's no way that you can test every single one. So, yeah, I think that's the thing I would say is the stigma around failure is that it's actually amazing to fail as long as you can get over it and stay in business, because you learn so much more from your failures and your mistakes, especially if you lose money. I find that's kind of the most impactful, unfortunately, because I will never forget, again, the areas where I've lost money. And it just makes you better and more resilient. And then also when you get over those failures and those major hurdles, it really teaches you how resilient you are. And that it either is gonna break your spirit or it's gonna make you come back even stronger. And we're still here, so yeah.
That's an interesting point about trust, because in large organizations like an RBC, there's a trust that's built in, and there's standards that allow people to trust each other. Very different from an entrepreneur on your own. How do you manage that question of trust? Because you've got to trust your suppliers, your partners, your customers, but you know that they're looking out for themselves as well.
Yeah, so because we're in manufacturing, we have the suppliers on that end that bring in the raw materials, and then we make it, and then our retailers and or the end consumer, if it's D2C, they are trusting that we're also putting out a certain, again, safe good that isn't contaminated with allergens or et cetera. So whenever we send out a shipment, we're trusting that store to pay us. They don't usually, but there's not much we can do. And then with the suppliers, we're trusting that it fits the certificate of analysis and all the lab tests. So you just learn like what to ask for, what to look for. You get samples. I mean, there's certain parameters you can set as you make mistakes to actually figure out this is the requirement I have in order to do business with you. And I think that's the same with people. Like, trust is earned. It's not something that's a right. So you have to earn that trust, and that's in everything in life, relationships, business or personal.
And Braden, tell us a bit about your own experience with failure and what you've learned along the way.
Yeah, I think so. One caveat with every startup is you see all these large funding headlines, and generally that's the tip of the iceberg, right? There's 90% of the work is behind the scenes. There's 9 failures for every 1 success, if not a much higher ratio than that. And so with us, we actually had a really dark period between when we were pivoting from Storyflow to Voiceflow. We were running out of money. At that point, we'd already dropped out, and so we had to do something for a year. We couldn't just run out of money and not do anything. And so we actually were applying for all the accelerators, the Y Combinator's of the world, Creative Destruction Lab, AngelList. We applied for pretty much every single accelerator you can imagine and got turned down by every single one. We got so desperate that there's it was a Western university has their own accelerator where you come to London and you work there for 3 or 4 months, and we didn't even get an interview for that. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're really in a bad spot. And so we just basically cut our expenses down to zero and just had to continue to grind through it. I could go into individual failures here. One of the things that we did really early on is we were an interactive children's story company, and we built Voiceflow as an internal tool. And so when you're building internal tools, and some of you who might be developers working on them here know that the code is spaghetti code. It's just meant to work. It's not meant to be scalable and flawless. But all of a sudden, we turned our internal business into our core business. And so for a couple months, we were working with the worst code base you've ever seen. And today, we power 6% of Alexa. And so when we would push a change and it would break, we'd take down 6% of Alexa. So if any of you have asked your Alexa something in the middle of the night and it says, sorry, I don't know that, sorry. There's a 6% chance that was us. And so we actually had to spend this entire summer refactoring and redoing all of the work we did in those early days. And that was a huge learning for us, is like, just do it properly the first time. Don't do it flawlessly, but get it to a point where in the future you're not gonna be kicking yourself if all of a sudden you have to make it more scalable.
So you talked about the incubator network in Canada. This is a great country to start a business in because there's incubators and accelerators all over the map. Most of them are really good, so a great place to get going. Tough country to scale in. We just don't have, 35, 40 million people versus the US or China, who you're ultimately going to be up against. I wonder how you both think about that challenge and how you're going about scaling in what ultimately is a small market. Braden, maybe we can start with you.
I think it really comes down to sort of what the venture capital landscape looks like in either country. So we've raised, our initial pre-seed round was with Canadian investors only, and then when we did our seed round, that was all with Silicon Valley investors. And so we got to see both different, sort of the two different perspectives. In Canada, and this is shifting, the perspective is, what do you have today? And then let's work forward, the next 2-3 years. What are your margins? What's your business look like? Let's walk through the numbers. In the US, the story flips in that they go, in 3 to 5 years, how big could this be? And then let's work backwards to where you are today. And so it's a subtle mind shift, but it plays a huge difference in that they're backing a lot more moonshot companies, and they're backing it with a lot more capital. And again, I think what's going to need to happen, I think it's happening slowly, is Canada's starting to get some more liquidity. We're starting to get larger exits, larger companies, where people are now going to fund Canadian companies with larger and larger funding rounds, which is going to help get more liquidity into the ecosystem, get more angel investors, and hopefully it's going to help project more startups. But yeah, I think for internet companies especially, really thinking about scaling very quickly and not just trying to build a lifestyle business if you're trying to do the venture scale thing. Because there are two different types of business, and Julia, I'll parlay it over to you.
That's such a great insight, though, because if you are starting your own business and looking for venture funding in the US, most VCs are going to want you to lose a lot of money. They want you to lose all the money over the first, you said 5 years, because they've invested in 100 of you, knowing that just one is going to work out, and that's okay. The math works that way.
In our first board meeting, we've raised a little under $5 million now. In our first board meeting, I walk in and I'm super scared. What's this going to be like? And because I'm like, we're spending a lot of money. This is crazy. And the thing that they were worried about was we're not spending enough money per month, which is a pretty crazy insight for me. Especially because you go from being a student where the numbers are much smaller, and I pay like $500-600 a month in rent in London, and then all of a sudden you're spending 50, 60, 120,000 a month. The numbers get very large, but for them it's nothing. It's crazy.
Julia, how are you thinking about scale?
Yeah, so just to your point, Canada has the population of California. So when you're actually selling physical products, it gets really difficult to actually build to a volume and a level in CPG where I can now compete with those massive conglomerates that are
CPG,
coming in. Consumer packaged goods, yes. So it's really difficult for me to compete. Like, it's much easier for the massive conglomerates in the US to come up, plus they have the benefit of currency exchange. Whereas down in Canada now, we have to build to a level to try and compete with the Americans. It's really tough to do manufacturing here and ship abroad. There's also so many regulations and exporting. It's really tough. And then just to your point in regards to culture, I think there is a massive change in regards to Americans and Canadians. When you compare them, we tend to be a lot more conservative, and that's from financing. They always want to see proof of concept, even when launching in retailers. They're like, who else has you? Where in the US, it's more of the Wild West. They're like, I want to be first. It's more like a conquest. So very different. So it's really challenging. I have not mastered it yet. It's really tough.
So why do you both stay here?
Stay like on the stage?
In Canada.
Oh. Yeah. I am leaving. No. So in Canada, we've definitely considered going south, moving manufacturing south, and even with an investment firm. Like, I would love to raise in the US to get some really strategic partners that are stateside, because that's the largest consumer market in the world. I would be ignorant if I didn't want that. But unfortunately, they all have a minimum of a certain amount of revenue per month. And I'm always like, how am I supposed to get that off of the population in California when we're so spread out and it costs so much to get the logistics out to the different cities? So, and they don't care. It's just, it's really tough. Yeah, so I definitely would consider moving to the States.
Tell us a bit about your own financing and how it's evolved.
Yeah, so I've done it all through debt financing, which is awesome. It's not. I still own 100% of my equity, and I wanted to get it to a place where we could actually get a strategic partner. It's not like in tech, again, when you're in food, it's the worst. Where literally like the valuation that we get, I think like in tech, you could literally have pre-revenue and they're like 20 times valuation. And I'm like, screw you. As I'm like peeling potatoes, I hate you all in tech. And in food, you're literally lucky to get like 3 to 5 times of your revenue. Like, you're lucky to get that. So it's really tough, yeah.
Okay, so Braden, talk about your own journey with finance.
And first I'll talk a little bit about why we're staying in Canada, because it does play into the financing. I think the reason that we're staying in Canada is largely for people like you in the room, in that we need more success stories in Canada to help continue the flywheel, right? It would be easier for Shopify, if early on when they got a bunch of VC money, to move to the Valley, because there's such experienced talent there, there's way more capital, but instead they made an active decision to stay in Canada. And that has impacted us at Voiceflow. That has made it easier for us to raise, because now when people think of Canadian companies and Canadian tech, they think, oh, there are success stories there, it's okay to place my capital. And so even though it might be tougher, I think it's the right thing to do. We all benefit from being in this great country, that we should try to pay it forward. If you can, build it here. Let's pay it forward to future generations of entrepreneurs. And there are also business benefits to staying in Canada as well. In terms of financing, the way it often works in tech is it's really, really hard to get financing until it's not, and then it becomes really, really easy. And so how that typically looks is no one wants to move first. It's all about finding a lead investor. Who's on your cap table? Who's already invested? I want to be with that person. And so we were struggling to get investment, and finally we convinced Ripple Ventures in Toronto, which is a great VC firm, to put in the first check, and then from there we were able to quickly fill up the rest of the round. When we were doing our seed round, actually, we were in the Valley. I did a podcast with PwC, if any of you guys are interested in the full story, where I just did a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley, and I was like, I will see you guys when I'm gonna come back with $1 million, and that was it. And so I did 8 different Airbnbs, and it was just the worst. But eventually, one firm did bite. Yeah, after so many rejections, 30 plus rejections, one firm bit, and then we were able to fill up the founder of Envision all of a sudden reaches out, and the founder of Webflow and Eventbrite, and I was like, where were you guys when 2 weeks ago I was crying on a couch at 1 a.m. because no one would fund us, and all of a sudden they come out of the weedworks because they hear that someone else is investing, and so that's typically how it happens. It's just about really struggling to find that one.
That's a really important message. We've in previous disruptors had Michelle Romano, you may know from Dragon's Den, and Alan Lau, founder of Wattpad. They said exactly the same thing, that they've got a lot of people who want to be second investors, but finding that first investor is really hard in Canada, and they just hustled. You gotta hustle, but that's something as a country we've got to get much better at.
Yeah. I think when you're financing, it's really important that you treat your financing the same way as you treat your product, and that you're iterating. So, for example, if someone rejects us, don't just be like, okay, woo is me. Ask them, why did you reject us? What's your objection? So for us, it was market timing. They were really worried about market timing. And so my initial pitch deck was classic, problem, solution, business model, market opportunity, all that kind of stuff. And then if you actually see the final deck that we raised on, it was 7 slides of market. So that by the time that they get to the 8th slide, they're like, I don't know anything about this business, but this is a fantastic market. And that was it. And you just clear that objection out of the way. So it's really important to find out why people are rejecting you, and to be proactive about it.
Tell us a bit about how you manage yourselves. It can be really taxing being an entrepreneur. How do you sort of manage your day and your week and your month to ensure you've got time to think, you've got time to rest, you don't burn out, because you're probably the only person looking out for you. Julia.
Yeah, so being a nutritionist, I think looking after yourself, I think it's a key piece in entrepreneurship that's not often talked about or always talked about. We kind of glorify the sacrifices and the lack of sleep and only getting, like, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. It's like a competition, and it shouldn't be, because you're really digging in deep and eventually it's gonna catch up to you. So it's been proven that you need sleep in order to function cognitively. So sleep is massive for me. If I don't sleep more than 6-7 hours, and every person's different, I'm a monster. So luckily for you, I got sleep last night. But yeah, I would be a monster. So I definitely suggest don't ever skip on sleep, and then just eating well. It's a common, or it should be common sense and logic. If you put in good ingredients, your body will function much better. You'll have more energy to really last and think clearly again, because you're not bogged down with all the energy it takes to digest processed food and just garbage. So eating clean, lots of plant-based foods, that's what I always focus on. But at the end of the day, like, again, I'm sure you'd also echo it, like, absolutely, there's mental strain, there's loneliness, depression, like failure, like it's a roller coaster.
How do you cope with that? Because you are dealing with a lot of rejection,
You have no
a lot
choice
of failure.
but to, right? Like, you just, I think having a group of fellow entrepreneurs is really helpful, because you can see it's not so lonely and it's not so, unique. It's not just you. Everyone has issues, and you can really lean on your network to try and problem solve to get through those issues that might really be, keeping you up at night. Yeah, don't be an island. Definitely reach out. And that's in anything, whether you're, in a big business or you're starting your own. You can't go through life. We're social beings. We're meant to be. So you have to have a good network and support network around you. And yeah, looking after yourself, for sure.
Yeah. Braden, how do you self-manage?
Yeah, I mean, I wake up at 4, no, I don't do any of this stuff. I think there's an unrealistic stigma that entrepreneurs are like machines, and like, they get up super early and they go to the gym. Like, entrepreneurs are just normal people with irregular jobs, is the way I would describe it. And so typically, like, I just try to make sure, in the early days when we were first starting, it is a grind, because when you're a 4-person team or 2-person team, your output, if you would do 10 hours instead of 6 hours, that has a material impact on the company. But as your company grows, the actual grind that you put in, it makes less and less of a difference of the total impact, sort of the total output of the company. And it's actually much better that you sleep and you're well rested and you have a good social life, because it's going to help you make better decisions. Because, again, like, a good way to think about entrepreneurship is you can either be like a sniper or a machine gun, right? You can either shoot a ton of bullets and just work crazy hours and you're hopefully going to hit something. But as you get later and later into the stages, it's much better to be a sniper. Just work 8, 9 hours a day, but just work on the right things. Prioritize your time effectively. The way that I think about my business is there's sort of a triangle of death. It's like either the market's making me feel like crap that day, something's going wrong with our team that day, or like our product is on fire. It's like one of those 3 things is always on fire. Hopefully not two at once, but you just expect it. It comes with the job. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And yeah, just be like a regular human and make sure you're healthy.
Tell us a bit about mentorship and how you've been able to develop mentors. Braden, I'll stay with you. How have you gone about?
Yeah.
About mentorship?
I think it's good to have mentors who are sort of like almost like family. That it's like unconditional love. So, for example, I might not want to have a mentor who also has a very tightly coupled financial interest in the success of my company. I might not want to go to them and be like, everything's on fire, right? Don't do that. You should have definitely a group of people who are very verticalized in what they're going to help you with. So, for example, we have Ramen Ventures in Toronto. Their former VP Product and VP Engineering of Shopify. Those are like our go-to people for product and engineering advice. And then we'll have Ripple Ventures for our financing advice. And then we'll have generally a closer entrepreneurial network of people where I can just rant to. I'm like, this thing's on fire, this thing sucks, I hate this, like all that kind of stuff. That's actually really important because it allows you to vent. If you just keep it pent up and feel like you're alone, it gets really tough. Like anxiety as an entrepreneur is a real thing. You'll often have to go for walks in the middle of the day, or you'll go for coffee when you've already had 5 coffees just to get out of the office. It happens, and you just need to know that it's a regular thing.
Those are great insights. Julia, how have you gone about mentorship?
Yeah, so I think looking to people who are ahead of where you are and or doing something that you really admire or where you want to be one day, I think is a good place to start. And obviously being in my industry, it's, we have a lot of networking events in the sense we have these trade shows where you're literally like, it's like a pony show, you're on display, and the founders are always there. So you can always go and meet with them, introduce yourself, and just ask them questions and cultivate relationships. I'll say, since I am in a male-dominated industry, sometimes it can be a little bit awkward as a female. I can't necessarily bro out like I'd love to with a lot of guys. Like I have some friends who are guy founders, and they're like, oh yeah, I went out for champagne on the rooftop with this guy, and I'm like, his wife wouldn't enjoy that. Like, I couldn't do that. Like, I wish I could, but that definitely comes, there's always gonna be that certain space. But yeah, you always want to surround yourself with people. I think that's a simple thing. With people who are ahead of you, regardless of sex, and just lean on them for some advice with things that you're dealing with, because it's very likely that they have as well. So. And
maybe even if it's outside of packaged goods or consumer goods, have you been able to find a network of female founders who've been able to, you've been able to lean on or turn to?
Yeah, I would say, I don't want to sound like a female basher, but I say sometimes it can be tricky to find females, at least in your industry. So I think finding ones that are outside, I feel females have a little bit of a competitive edge to them sometimes. I haven't been treated the best by other females always, but yeah, I do. I think as long as it's from other industries, we can share some of the experiences there as being a female founder. And then Next Canada has been great in regards to hooking us up with, now, I don't know if you found that too, but mentors that were fantastic and from other industries and just so experienced. I loved that, so yeah.
We've got a great story here. When we were in the Next 36 last summer, we were just doing these interactive children's stories, and we were really on the grindstone. We were working 10, 12-hour days. And there was a Next founder company called Rockwell Razors, started by a guy named Gareth, and he just happened to see us on the grindstone all day, and so we became friends, and eventually he actually wrote our first check. He was our first ever external investor, simply because we were working on a dumb idea, but he saw that we were really passionate, and so certainly not only being able to get mentorship from people who are a couple years ahead of you, like for example what we found with Gareth, but there's also potentially the upside for them to invest, and that's a great relationship to have.
Tell us about some of the hard decisions or the toughest decisions you've had to make, Julia.
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, you definitely make a lot of sacrifices because you have to choose what's my priorities, and it's obviously going to be building a business if you're all in. So definitely you have sacrifices with personal relationships. My boyfriend, I'm lucky to see him for the time we sleep beside each other sometimes, and that's about it, and he has to be okay with that. My family, I don't see that much. I don't really have as much of a social life as I'd like, but that's just how it is, so yeah.
Braden, what's the toughest decision you've had to make as an entrepreneur?
Probably having to let people go is really rough. And I think when you let people go, the first time, a lot of people think that it's the other person's fault if you're letting them go. The second that you're actually in the position where you have to do this, you realize it was your failure, right? Like, I failed as a person. I shouldn't have hired you because the role wasn't a good fit, or I should have screened better, or I didn't train you, or I didn't give you enough resources or mentorship or whatever it might be. There was a failure on your part as a manager, and now you have to let this person go, and it's going to hopefully not severely, but it's going to impact their lives in a material way. And so we've had to do this a couple times now, and I think it definitely weighs heavily on you, as you have to see they search for a new job, and you just try to hope you can help them land on their feet as best you can. I think it's a really good practice to be very generous with severance, as at the end of the day, it might be a larger dollar figure, but over a 5-10 year company, them feeling like they were treated fairly and sort of spreading good words about your company to the community is worth more than any money that you could pay out.
Yeah, what goes around comes around usually.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got just a few minutes left, and one of the reasons that we hold this event on youth entrepreneurship every summer is not to turn everyone or hope everyone becomes an entrepreneur, but whatever you end up doing with your careers, to the audience here, you're going to be working with entrepreneurs. And we think this is an important way of helping to develop all of our understanding and appreciation of entrepreneurs. I wonder if you could take us towards close with some insights and advice for the people in the audience as they're going back to school in a couple of weeks, or even next week in some cases. What should they be thinking about in terms of their approach to school and thinking beyond school? Julia?
Yeah, well, say if you are thinking of doing your own venture, which is totally cool, just start. Like, the hardest thing is always just starting. Take that leap of faith. You'll learn something either way, whether you'll learn about yourself as a person. Like, I think that's the biggest thing, is I've learned so much about myself as an entrepreneur. And you'll learn obviously about your industry and the failures and whatever you might have. So just do it, is not to quote Nike, but is really what you should do. Just start. And obviously, if you're not going to be an entrepreneur and you don't do an adventure, treat yourself like an entrepreneur. Like, turn yourself into a fine-tuned machine, constantly challenge yourself, constantly learn, constantly be curious, and constantly take risks. And you can be an entrepreneur and make massive difference on the economy of Canada, regardless of the institution you're working at.
That's great advice. Even if you're in a large organization, be it RBC or any other one in Canada or the US or elsewhere, you can be entrepreneurial and just starting. It's called a startup for a reason. Someone started something. Braden, what's your advice to the group here?
I think I'll sort of do an add-on to that. Mine is find your tribe. So who here is that from Western University? Hands up. Ooh. Who here? Keep your hands up if you know about W5 at Western University. Hands up. A couple people. Okay, cool. So that was a club my friends and I started simply because we were trying to find other entrepreneurial people. It's really important that when you're actually starting a venture, the toughest thing is your startup won't fail, you'll give up on it, right? Like, if you just think about it logically, if you never stop working on your startup, it will never fail. And so that's why all startups fail. And so it's really important that you find your tribe of people where you can chat with them and you can continue to update each other on progress and motivate each other. Even better if you have a co-founder, because it's going to keep you accountable. Because again, most people, most college startups will die because what happens is you have an exam next week, you have a social tonight, and you have to make that choice between, am I going to put the 2 hours to take, put the next step of my business, I'm going to come up with a logo tonight, or am I going to go, study for an exam or do this thing? Ideally, you can do all of them, but there's only 24 hours in a day, and so find your tribe to keep each other motivated.
Quickly, one book, podcast, video that you'd recommend people?
Yeah, so a podcast,
for people? Yeah.
How I Built This, and a book, I would say Sapiens was awesome, or Factfulness. Both those are great.
Sapiens, Factfulness, or How I Built This.
Yes.
Great.
Oh, man.
Braden.
That was exactly mine, too.
That's for one, and she did three, so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A couple books I've read this summer which are good. I think if you haven't read The Lean Startup, it's a fantastic just sort of framework to think through. I think Crossing the Chasm is also a really good book if you want to think about entrepreneurship and disruptive tech. In terms of podcasts, if you're into voice tech, there's a great podcast called the VoiceBot Podcast. It's really good.
Great advice. So as with every Disruptors, as a token of appreciation to our guests or for our guests, we make a charitable donation in their names to the charity of their choice. Braden and Julia, I wonder if you can tell us a bit about the charities that you've designated. Julia.
Yeah, I chose the Malala Fund. I'm super go female power and education, so simple. I just love what she does. And
wonderful choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you.
I think I chose Next Canada because
sorry,
it is thinking. It is a nonprofit, and it gave me my start. We've been able to create employment, so I think Next is a fantastic engine of growth for the country.
And that's the perfect setup for Joe Canavan, the CEO of Next, who I think is here and may join us on stage to tell us a little bit about Next. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, John.
How are you?
So I'm going to keep this really, really, really brief. You just saw two of our very successful founders. Behind them, there are 500 more. In the 9 years that we've been around, we've helped educate. So in our academic curriculum, you'll see profs from Rotman, Harvard, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Georgetown. Like, we have an incredible academic group. We have mentors that are like Candace Factor that runs her own venture firm, Jordan Banks, who was the CEO of Facebook. We have incredible mentor access. Some of the top founders and CEOs in the country. We have an incredible network access program. And we have an ability to launch businesses with financial capital. So it's a bit of an accelerator as well. But the real power and the real beauty is bringing corporate Canada to have a partner like RBC to be behind us. They are the reason that Next AI was founded. It was their vision for what could come out of Canada, and they really propelled us to build that entire commitment to artificial intelligence. And out of that, we're launching about 25 to 30 companies a year here in Ontario, and we're now launching another 25 to 30 in Quebec, and we're thinking about doing the same in Alberta, and that really is our corporate partnerships and those relationships. The other thing I would tell you is we bring all the founders together. And next April, we're going to bring Next AI, Next Founders, and Next 36 together and do an offsite. So the relationships happen sooner, they're more meaningful, they're deeper, and they're more powerful. So if you're thinking at all, and when I look at this room, I see the future of Canada. If you're thinking even a little bit about being an entrepreneur, being a builder of the next great company, think about as we launch our application process right now for Next 36, think about whether or not that's right for you.
Joe, how do people contact you or contact?
Right onto the website. Come to me. We have a number of members of our team in the room. We would be delighted. So the process is you fill out an application, and then we have a big weekend in November where we bring everybody together and make the selection. So it's called Selection Weekend.
That's great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you all for being part of this great conversation. If you want to follow us on Disruptors, you're more than welcome to register and come back. Our next session in advance of the federal election is on disrupting democracy. Not how to disrupt democracy, but what we all need to be mindful of what's going on out there in the world in terms of disruptive forces. We're staging that with the Rotman School at U of T, talking about some of the technologies that are at play in various elections around the world. And then in October, that's on September 12th, and on October 2nd, we're hosting our 50th Disruptors, a special edition of it here in this auditorium with the co-CEOs of the Toronto International Film Festival. TIFF will have just concluded, so they'll come and share their stories about what's going on in terms of disrupting film. You can register for our mailing list, listen to our podcast. We'll share this as a podcast on SoundCloud and iTunes. For those of you watching on WebEx and Facebook Live, thanks for joining us. Please follow us on social media and be sure to come back for future conversations. Julia and Braden, thank you so much. Terrific conversation, and congratulations on all you're building as entrepreneurs.
Thanks for having us.